Late night bites with friends? Already hard to beat. That first too hot bite of fries you couldn't wait for, followed by ice cold Pepsi. Now that hits different. Suddenly, the energy kicks back in, the night goes longer, and the laughs don't stop. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
Kate walked into a small chapel in Sydney, a non-believer, and walked out certain she had just been in the presence of a saint. She couldn't explain it. The air felt electric, and sitting there, one thought arrived with no doubt attached to it. I am in the presence of a saint. She left clutching an armful of biographies, knowing she had only a taste, knowing that there was more coming. And she was right. What started in that chapel became a novel. A cancer diagnosis, she somehow came out a bit happier, a hermit learning to step into the light, and a story that turned out to be as much hers as it is the saints. Kate didn't just stumble into that chapel out of nowhere. A near-death experience in a forest, losing her mother at 53, becoming a doctor, becoming a mother, every shift in her life had quietly been pointing her towards that pew. And when she finally sat down in it, something opened, something that is still opening.
In that chapel, me as a non-Catholic just had this deep, abiding, unquestioned knowledge I'm sitting in the presence of a saint.
You're listening to the Life Shift Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Gilhooly. This show is built around one simple idea, that sometimes a single moment can change how we see everything. Each week, I talk with someone about the moment that shifted their life and how they learned to live differently after it. These are not stories about having it all figured out. They are stories about what it looks like to keep going once the story changes. Thank you for being here. Here's today's story. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Life Shift Podcast. I am here with Kate. Hello, Kate.
Hello. Thank you for having me on your show, Matt.
Well, thank you for wanting to be a part of it. I never know how these conversations are going to go, but I also know going in, they're going to go exactly how they were supposed to go, which sounds very silly to say it out loud, but it's true.
It is.
You know, we're two humans having hopefully a real conversation about moments in our lives that may be wildly different, but at the same time, so many of us can relate to how you feel around certain moments, how you move through certain moments, how you get stuck in certain moments, all the pieces that come along with it. And I've really learned, I've recorded over 275 conversations now. And it's funny to me to see that cliche of like, we have so much more in common than we have that separates us. It's like so true. And it's silly to like say that. But at the same time, I think we think of that saying on the surface as something that's just something people say, when really I can hear stories of people that have wildly different experiences than me, and I can relate to so many parts of their story. So we just need more of these conversations. So I'm grateful that you wanted to be a part of it.
Thank you.
So before we get started and before we dive into your story, maybe you can tell us who Kate is in 2026. Like, how do you show up in the world? How do you identify these days?
I've been thinking about that because I noticed that's your question. And I really had to think deeply about, well, how do I answer that? That's the only part of the podcast that I've prepared. So we'll see what happens. But I feel like I'm a bit of a tapestry or a mosaic. You know, we have lots of little pieces of us. In the past, I was a general practitioner, and then something happened and I shifted away from that and became a full-time mother who homeschooled my kids, and all of those parts are still somewhere in there. And these days, I would say I am someone who loves living the question of, well, what's life? What's life? And I'm a writer, and I've just had my first book published. And, you know, I started writing at 10. I'm now 61. So overnight success that took 51 years, you know.
That's how it goes.
Well,
congratulations on that. That's a big feat to publish a book.
It was a big feat, yes.
Yeah,
but it was a story that really needed telling.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was cathartic for you as well, because sometimes these, I mean, as hard as it may have been at certain times, there's catharsis in it, or no? It looks like you're thinking no.
I am thinking. What I wrote was a historical fiction novel, and it was about a real person that I came across, and something happened. You know, she got into my interior world, into my soul. And so it's sort of, I'd never heard of this woman. Her name's Eileen O'Connor, and she's currently being investigated. She may end up being Australia's second saint. And someone said to me while I was in Sydney, which is an airplane flight from where I live, oh, you should go and visit Eileen's house. And I'd never heard of her, and I went, and it's now in a convent. And there was a little museum, you know, the old 1950s style museum. This was, 2017, but it was still the old style museum in her house with artifacts of this extraordinarily difficult, painful life this woman who was disabled and unwell lived. And I was in awe of how she had achieved what she did, which was from her sick bed, she had established a domiciliary nursing organisation in 1913 to look after the poor in the slums of Sydney from her own sick bed, which is astonishing. And then her bedroom has been turned into a chapel. So that's where the pews are. An adjoining wall has been taken out. She's got an altar there, and she's buried under the floor. And sitting in that chapel, me as a non-Catholic just had this deep, abiding, unquestioned knowledge I'm sitting in the presence of a saint. And so I guess you could say I fell in love. And I went home with biographies about her and read about her and lived the question of how did she do what she did for a year or two. And then one day, after getting rejections on 2 novel manuscripts.
Hey, part of the group, I think. I think most people get those.
You have to collect them, yeah. Enough to paper your walls. I was questioning, what do I really write? And I write spiritual love stories, and no one wants them. You know, no one wants to hear that. So when do you get permission to write a spiritual love story? When you're writing about a saint, write about Eileen. It just came in like a bolt of lightning. And that's how the story of writing her began. But then things really evolved, because I finished the first draft of the manuscript, and I worked with her nuns, and so I was really living in the accuracy and how do you authentically portray someone respectfully who is being investigated for a saint. That's a tall order, I felt. And so I was living in that space of diligence and honoring this woman. And then we sort of started going into COVID, and something really weird had happened. Just before COVID, I started making rosaries. I'd never seen a rosary, but it was like this compulsion. And I made lots and gave them away to people. I made them with pretty beads and pretty crystals and whatever. And I had no idea what to do with them. And COVID comes, everyone stocks up on toilet paper except me. I'm stocking up on beads, you know. And then not that long afterwards, I was diagnosed with cancer. And looking back, I can see that Eileen knew what was going to happen and that I would need something to hold me through that experience. And so I have no doubt she was the one that put this idea, you have to make rosaries. And when I was going through, I had a stomach cancer. It bled. I needed blood transfusions, you know, chemotherapy and surgery to remove my stomach. And then you learn to eat and drink again. So it was like, you know, a really bleak, horrible time. And through that time, there was Eileen. She stopped being this historical figure that blew my mind and became what people would call a spiritual companion. And really taught me that no matter who you are, there is this incredible, mysterious, loving resource in the universe that can hold you in the worst of times.
Yeah, I mean, you found what you needed, I think, at the time. And I think a lot of people that I talk to come across or stumble upon, or however we want to describe it, something that they really needed at that moment in time to kind of carry them through. And it sounds a little bit like you've shared a bunch of life shifts that all happened in like a shorter period of time. Would you say that there are many of them? And I would imagine like we could analyze each one and how that then pushed you into a new direction. But before we do that, I would love for you to kind of paint that before. So you said you were a general practitioner. Is that what you said?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. You were, and then you became a full-time mother and homeschooling, which is a whole other beast that comes along with it. Can you give us more of like that before version of Kate? And then maybe we'll force you to identify which one you think is the biggest life shift moment. But before, give us that previous version of Kate. You can go back as far as you need to kind of give us that picture.
All right. I'll go right back to the beginning.
Okay.
When I was 3, my brother was born. So my mother was still pregnant at the time this happened. So we're talking maybe I was like just under 3 even. And and we were selling our house in England, and this woman, in those days, people would come through when you were home and the homeowner would show them around the house. You didn't have a realtor doing it. And so this woman came in, and I was dressed up in my dress-up little nurse's uniform. And this woman, she seems like she's, in my memory, she's 8 feet tall, you know, and one of those bombastic matrons, you know, the stereotype.
Yeah.
And she saw this dear little girl in her nurse's uniform, and she'd been a matron, and she bent right over me, and she obviously pressed some buttons in me because she was saying, "Oh, isn't it lovely? You're going to be a nurse when you grow up." And something happened, and I said, "No, I'm not going to be a nurse. I'm going to be a doctor and boss the nurses around," because obviously I felt she was bossing me in a way that I didn't like. And so anyway, yes, so I ended up being a doctor.
Yeah. Wow. From that, I mean, were you interested in all that, or were you just dressing as a nurse just because it was fun? Did you know you wanted to help other people? Was that like, I mean, you're so young, it's hard to even know. But
I know by the time I was 5 or 6, I was doing terrible things like, you know, the stories of when children were sick, people would shave off their hair, you know, in the 1800s, because they had this idea that hair stole nutrients from you. And if you were critically ill, then taking the hair off would actually relieve some of the burden on the body. You know, those like 1960s dolls? Oh, my God.
Well, at least it was dolls. I thought you were going to say like your mom or your brother.
No, I was never brave enough to cut my brother's hair. But yes, so yes, I had sick dolls that needed that kind of I don't know how I'd even heard by the age of 5 that that's what you did, you know. Yeah. So I ended up being a doctor in a sort of small country town outside of the city I live in. And I was a solo GP. So we're talking the old times. This was the 90s. And I loved it. I really did. But after 11 years in 10 or 11 years in general practice, I had my first child. And I had a life shift moment then as well when I was pregnant with her, because beforehand I'd been brought up by a feminist. And it was like, oh, yes, you'll be a doctor. You can have a nanny, you know. But as soon as I was pregnant with my daughter, it was like, this is sacred. This child is not someone I'm going to just hand over to let someone else bring up. So that was kind of where the being a full-time mum story had its germination. But I had a near-death experience between my daughter and my son. I had a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. And it wasn't diagnosed promptly because I was told, oh no, it can't. I rang my obstetrician. I said, I have an ectopic pregnancy, because I just knew I had pain. I'd started spotting, and he was like, no, it can't be that. It's too early. Ectopic pregnancies start bleeding at week whatever, and you're 2 weeks before that. And anyway, so I was kind of in this limbo land while he was working out and doing blood tests over several days. And so I did the whole thing of needing blood transfusions again at that time. And I had this near-death experience where it was not quite typical, but it was definitely an out-of-body experience. I was walking through a forest. There was this beautiful forest on either side of me and a path up the middle. And I was walking up a hill, and at the top of the hill was this house. It was a cottage, the perfect storybook cottage with the roses and the picket fence and the let me in there. It's so beautiful. That's my home. I want to be there. And everything was peaceful and the hyper color thing that other people talk about as well. And so I was walking to get there and noticed that along the outside of the picket fence blocking the gate, I had relatives stopping. And there was a voice which I don't believe came from my relatives, and it was, you have to go back. And I'm like, it is so beautiful here. I don't want to go back. And so the voice got louder, and I basically felt I was being shouted at. You have to go back. You have to go back. And so, I'm back, obviously. But I had this 3 days of complete bliss. And it's just as well it didn't last, because it was very trippy. And, I was in the hospital and a cleaner would come in to mop the floor, and I could not effusively thank them enough, because I was so annoyingly grateful for their mop.
Yes. Must have been a good job that they did there.
Must have been.
Before this, though, were you fairly spiritual? Were you connected to universe, if you will? Or
yes, I was one of those people, like, spiritual, not religious.
Okay.
But people who are neither spiritual nor religious have these kind of experiences too. Yeah. So
I was just curious if that paints a different picture at all. I'm not sure. I haven't had one, so I can't explain that. But I think also there is, for people that are not quite religious, it can be a different experience too. Whereas someone that is highly religious or super religious, if you will, they might see it as different than universe or cottage or those kind of things. So just curious.
Yes. Yeah. So at that point, I knew a couple of things. I already knew I would have 2 children. And I'd had, like, my daughter, I'd had 2 miscarriages, then I had the ectopic pregnancy. But I knew that I was going to have 2 children. I knew I had a son somewhere waiting. And I also knew that if I kept working, it wasn't going to happen. My son wouldn't be born. And so,
like an instinctual, like, feeling.
Yeah.
And were you someone that always trusted your gut?
Not always. No, okay. There have been plenty of times where I should have, and
some people I can't. It's very hard to convince me to trust my gut, even though most times it kind of is like, well, you should have, because that would have kept you out of this situation. But some people just lean right into it, and, like, they just go with, if their gut tells them, that's the truth right there.
I think it depends what it is. If my gut tells me something that's like a little beacon to reach for, then yes, I'm happy to go with that. And yeah, there are a number of points in my life where I've done exactly that. If my gut is telling me something I really don't want to hear,
fair.
Then yeah.
Yeah. That's hard. I mean, yeah, it's hard. It seems like you have a happy personality. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think so. And it's grown.
Like the energy that I'm feeling across the seas and through this it feels very warm. you feel very warm. And have you always been that way?
Underneath things, yeah. I mean, there have been times in my life where, I've been through divorces and, things that didn't work out.
Miscarriages and all the things. Those are
Yeah,
hard. Can't be
those are
happy through
hard.
those. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your energy now, so it's very infectious. So in a good way. So yeah, go on with your story. So you became, I mean, obviously you had your son and you became
I
a
had my
mother.
son. Yep. So I have the 2 children, and the seed of homeschooling had been planted in me before I even was pregnant by my husband at the time, who said, oh, we could always homeschool the kids if we end up having some. He was American, so homeschooling was more common in America than it was in Australia. But when I decided, when my daughter was 2, that I wanted to homeschool them, I said that to him, and he was like, where did you get that idea from? And he swore, as long as we ever talked about it, that he had no memory of that conversation. So interesting. So yeah, homeschooling the kids was fabulous because we followed a very eclectic unschooling kind of approach, which meant whatever was interesting was where we went. And that was great for me as well, because it was fun. And my mum died when I was 27. She had cancer. And she'd always talked about, oh, when I retire, we'll go on this big trip. We'll go back to England. I'll show you all the places where you grew up, I grew up, all those sorts of things. And of course, that never happened. And I always regretted that. But when I got to the point I was having my children, it was at the time my mum would have retired. That trip would have never happened, even if she'd stayed alive. And so I just was in the life is precious right now. It's not something you put off until something else has happened.
Losing your mom, was that kind of reminder or of life is precious?
Yes, and definitely the don't put it off.
Yeah, because she must have been fairly young.
She was 53.
Yeah, very young. I would imagine. Was it, this is a side tangent, was it odd when you turned 53?
Yes, it was. Just like you hear everyone sort of saying, because, there's a part of you that thinks I won't make it past that.
Yeah. When my mom died when I was 8, I had no plans after 32. That's how old she was. And for me, it just didn't make sense. Like, clearly I'm not going to get that old, even though everyone around me, grandparent, like everyone was getting older than that age. But for me, somehow there was like no number after that for me. So it was very awkward. The year that I turned 32 and then when I turned 33 was especially awkward. So I'm glad I'm not alone in that.
I think it's really common, isn't it? You've talked to a lot of people. It seems, it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, but and what you gain, I mean, I think what you were able to gain because you were a little bit older was this appreciation for living now, like do the things now, don't wait. Whereas I was afraid of all of that because there was such a risk. So, in some senses, it's like a nice little, losing someone is not nice, but the after effect and what we can learn from it is like, do it, like do the things, like keep going and doing all those things. When she passed, did you immediately feel that, or did it take a little bit to gain that experience or that feeling?
I think it must have taken a little while because, you've got your grieving to do. I was already running a solo general practice, so I was busy and I was going through my first divorce, because
life happens.
But yes, it certainly, I think it really grew on me when I was having the children.
Okay.
That, because suddenly you're looking at your children and you're looking at you as a person with no mother. And, the first Mother's Day and all those sorts of things. And so I think probably that's when it became such a clear focus. Don't waste anything.
Your story, I mean, you haven't told your whole story, but you've told pieces of your story so far. And I just think like so many of these could be such a singular life shift moment and all the little things that you've said. And it makes me wonder if you see all of them as these major life shifts where Kate is quite different in the before and after of these things. Do you think any of them were just kind of like trajectories to a new direction? Or do you really feel that some of these were like, who was I and who am I now?
I don't feel there's that much different. Like, I don't feel like it's chalk and cheese.
Okay.
But definitely a major rearrangement in terms of priorities. I've become happier over my life, I would say. Like, I became happier because of having cancer, which makes no sense.
I've heard it.
Yeah.
It rearranges your life. Would the cancer diagnosis, does that feel like the largest life shift for you or the most life-changing to you?
Definitely the most life-changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you call that your life shift? Like if someone was like, what? Like if someone was like, pick one. This is a terrible question, but just for fun.
No. If you look at life shift moments, there are some that are negative and some that are positive. So you could say the cancer was a negative, as in a traumatic life shift. And, there's a lot of, as you know, there is a lot of grief with cancer. You grieve the future, you grieve the expectations you had. You then deal with all the practical things of the chemotherapy makes you feel terrible. The surgery is, what I had was huge. Being in your 50s and thinking, I have to learn how to drink a glass of water again because I don't have a stomach. This is not something you ever thought you'd have to learn again, Mm-hmm. So that's really kind of, I could say a rude word, but I won't, but it's pretty horrible.
Yeah.
But in terms of what was the biggest moment, the invitation of having children and the experience of sitting in Eileen's chapel and knowing she was there, knowing that was an invitation as well that is kind of beyond words. But, the cancer is nothing compared to love.
I agree. But I mean, playing devil's advocate here, not even though you're talking about a chapel, I think that sometimes these traumatic things, such as this cancer journey, this horrible thing that you would not wish on anyone, can also bring about some change that is positive.
Absolutely right.
Things can come from those because we see how dire that particular moment was or how much we had to overcome, that now everything feels different because now you want to live every moment. You want to, so I would not wish my mom dying in an accident on any other person. Of course, I would want her to live. But also, if I think about this 45-year-old version of myself, it's really hard to envision who I would have been had she not died, because of all the failure and the things that I did through the grief journey brought me here. So it's a very weird thing, like it's weird to be sad, but also grateful for what has come from something like that. So, but I totally understand what you're saying is that, and I think it's also personality based, but those moments of invitation, as you say, to awareness of probably what you knew all along, and it just kind of awakens in you is probably way more powerful for certain personalities than Debbie Downers like me.
I think you're not a Debbie Downer. What you have just said has made me see something different. So what I described as the negative experience of cancer, as you were speaking, I was getting this picture of Michelangelo with a block of marble, taking away all the bits that, cover up the sculpture inside the marble.
Yeah.
And so that's That's the cancer. The invitation is the beam of light hitting the statue. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah. Which is so hard to swallow, I think, a lot of times. And I also think there's something to be said that there is, I don't want to use the word luck, but that's the only word that comes to my head. Like, if we are lucky to move through that moment in the way that is most healthy for ourselves. Because some people can it's very easy to get stuck in a downward spiral when you go through something like a cancer diagnosis and all the treatments. I'm sure it's very easy to stay in that not woe is me, but like, I just feel terrible. I'm never going to feel better. It's for me, depression was so much easier to stay in than it was to fight my way out. So I say that I'm lucky that I had the tools and I was able to crawl my way out of that. So I think, I use a little bit of luck there, but that's probably not the right word.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, there are people who, for whatever reason, get stuck, and there are people who, for some other reason, don't.
Right. But you were able to, I love this idea of this block, and like the cancer could be the chisel, if you will, pulling apart the things that weren't necessarily what you needed in the next part of your life. And then you were able to have all the good things that come from being this sculpture that you want to be, or that you always were. Is that what we're saying? Am I making this up now?
You're not always that. There's potentiality.
Yeah.
And then stuff happens, and then maybe that potential is realized more.
Yeah. No, I think, this is why I love these conversations, because I never would have brought any of this up out loud that doesn't quite fully make sense. Like, it's half baked coming out of my mouth. But I think it's so important, because if it's in my head, it's going to be in other people's heads. So, we have these conversations, and your experience is going to be different than my experience in a lot of cases, and the way we see things. So I appreciate you going down the Matt road briefly, but let's get back on the Kate road of your journey. I love that you see those two very positive moments as your life shift moments. Like, I really do, because there's something to be said about those awakening moments and what they do for you. Parenting is obviously one that a lot of people have, but this other one that you felt in that chapel, that was before the book, right?
Yes, that was before the book. Yeah.
So you were going there just as a exploratory type visit?
Yeah, I was in the convent of Mary MacKillop, our one official saint, and so I posted a picture on Facebook, and just someone that I knew peripherally saw the picture and said, "Oh, if you like Mary, you should go to Eileen's house." And I'm like, "Okay, I've never heard of her." I rang up. You had to make an appointment to go. So I rang up and was able to get there on the same trip to Sydney. And yeah, I could have said, "No, it's too hard. I don't want to work out how to catch buses to get there."
Yeah.
But I said yes, and I went. And my life has I was called there, and my life has never been the same since.
You said you were sitting on one of the pews or something in the chapel and you felt that. Can you describe that moment more? Like, what was that feeling like to you? I'm sure people can relate to this.
People can, because there was the atmosphere was electric. It like a buzzing electric feeling that, where you feel alive and you feel something in your skin and you feel something totally in your whole body, that there's something here. Yeah. How
did you know it was what you said it was, and not just a good energy?
I had no doubt. It was just 100%. You are in the presence of a saint. Well, it wasn't even you. It was I am in the presence of a saint. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's It's a big thing. What is it like walking out the door now that you have this knowledge?
Oh, I was clutching the biographies, you know. I knew that I would be reading those books. I knew there was something else coming. Like, I knew I hadn't got enough. I knew I'd had a taste, but I wanted more.
And then rosary beads come from that.
Rosary beads came from that. But more than that, you know, I got to understand Eileen because she had tuberculosis. She'd contracted it by the age of 3. And it had lodged not just in, you know, it wasn't so much a lung infection for her, though it was in her lungs at the end, but it lodged in her spine. So she had infection in the vertebrae of her back, causing abscesses where bones should be, causing terrible deformity as her back sort of collapsed, causing pressure on her spinal cord, so she was partially paralyzed, causing inflammation throughout her nervous system, so she would be unconscious at times. She would be, her vision would be affected, something called transverse myelitis, which is very much like multiple sclerosis. It's in terms of how it affects people. She only grew to be 115 centimeters tall, so about 3'9", 3'10". She was so fragile that someone once managed to break bones in her hand by shaking her hand. So the more I knew, because of my medical background, I could see her, I could understand her, I could feel how she walked. I knew what someone with that spinal condition walked like, shuffling tiny steps, afraid of jarring because of the pain. I knew she'd have terrible bed sores. And when I did my research, I went back to Sydney right before lockdowns happened with COVID. It was incredible timing. I spent time with two of the old nuns, one of whom has passed away since then. Another is no longer well enough to be able to help me. So it was like impeccable timing. And I was able to see some copies of x-rays that had been taken of Eileen. And so I'm holding them in my hand and going, I know, like my medical knowing knew what this human being had gone through physically. And it was so heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, and you hear all that, and then all the things you said she did, despite what pain she must have been in and the things that she was facing physically, is like astonishing in a way. Were there things about her? Like, why do you suppose you were drawn to her? Like, do you see any parts of you in her? Or sometimes, is that a weird question? I don't know.
No, it's not. It's a very perceptive question. When I was in my 30s, I had a neurological condition, which we never were able to exactly get a full diagnosis on, partly because I'm a former GP bad patient, lost interest in the system and walked away with this looks like it could be MS, but it was never actually fully diagnosed. And so I went off and just managed it myself with diet and going to India and whatever you do. And so when I rang up the convent and said, I want to write about Eileen, I was actually grilled by one of the nuns, like grilled nicely.
Yeah.
Obviously, to make sure that I was someone that they felt confident in to write the story. And one of the questions that she asked me was, what do you understand about multiple sclerosis? And I said, well, you know, I'm a GP. I've had patients with that, but also I've had presumed diagnosis myself. And at that point, it was like, okay, you understand multiple sclerosis. You will understand transverse myelitis. You're a GP. You will understand Eileen's medical condition, because you cannot write Eileen unless you understand her medical story. And so then what happened was this year, well, towards the end of last year, going into the publication of her book, I started having what I thought was a flare-up of multiple sclerosis again. And so I was like reticent, worried, all the things you would be. And as a mother, it's like, oh, have I passed genes on to my kids? The whole works, you know? And one day I just sat with Eileen because she became this daily presence because I wrote her, I worked with her, she worked with me. She kept me on the straight and narrow. And I said, look, if you need me to have multiple sclerosis for some reason, I'll do it. And then I went and saw a neurologist, and I was diagnosed with a peripheral neuropathy, which has reversed. And yes, I have changes on my CT scan and my MRI, exactly the same as I'd had in the past. So she said, yeah, you've had an inflammatory brain condition. I don't know what it is. I'm pretty confident this was never multiple sclerosis. It's something else. And so, yes, so there are like those commonalities of story that if I'd said, no, I've got no real experience of MS, I wouldn't have had the heartfelt confidence of the nuns who then helped me, who read the first draft of the manuscript, who filled me in on details that were not easily available, that allowed me into the archives, So it's, yes, there are some kind of connections that go beyond what I can understand.
Same. I think I want to ask, because I think you know her, right, from all this and your connection with this maybe soon to be saint. What did she teach you about yourself?
Okay, there are a couple of things. One is that I could get through what I needed to get through by doing it just one breath at a time if necessary. The big message of Eileen was about, I said at the beginning, there is a mysterious loving force that is available to anyone that can help us get through the really bleak times. And that's her message for everyone, but using me as an example, because, at the beginning you ask, well, who are you as you show up now? So you're reminding me of a story. When I wrote Eileen's book, it was all about her. I would call it Eileen's novel, even to the publisher, when I finally got a publisher. It was never my novel. It was always Eileen's. And I felt like when you write a pitch to a publisher, you write, what is your book called? How many words? What's the target audience? Give us a synopsis. Give us your author bio. And there's a kind of like a postscript, which is really short at the bottom. Why are you the person to write this book? And I just envisaged that Eileen's story is so important. It is a story of courage and hope in the face of insurmountable obstacles. Ring any bells? We're doing that right now. This is the world we're in. And we need that message. And she was such an incredible person. Her story deserves to be better known. And so that was my motivation. This is for Eileen. And I felt like when I talked about the book, it would be, this is Eileen's story. I'm telling you all about Eileen's story. By the way, I'm hiding behind the cover. You can't really see me. And then the book is published and it's like, oh, people want to know that last line, that postscript, why did you write the book, actually becomes really important. So I felt like Eileen's story and my story came to here, much closer together. And then once I did my book launch and was reflecting, I realized that that wasn't right either. The story is what happened in my life because I know Eileen. So the story stopped being Eileen's story and it was our story. And so I have gone from being a hermit. I love peace and quiet. And that's why I was so challenged by your question, how do you show up in the world? I don't really want to admit to how I show up in the world. I'm just a person, you know, I'm just an ordinary person who doesn't want the spotlight, doesn't need people to say anything wonderful, you know. So I have changed in the last few months from being this hermit with this delusion that I can write a book about a saint and it's, you know, and hide and no one will know anything about why I did it or what happened to me after I did it, you know, or during that process, to being okay with that. It was just, yeah, okay. It's okay.
Yeah. You were the conduit. I mean, it helped you through this journey. I know early on I said, was this cathartic? I think hearing your story, it sounds like it was putting this together. As hard as moments were, what it's brought you to hear, because now you know her, now you've helped share her story, now that you've put hope into the world, it feels like there's some kind of healing that came with that. As hard as moments throughout it were, it seems like, outside perspective, I don't want to put this on you, but it seems like there has been transformation because of this.
There is. And I've also learned something really interesting. Eileen is contagious. You know, I talk about Eileen to people, and then a while later they'll say something's happened. You know, someone in the family's been sick. They've been talking to Eileen and they really feel that presence. And it's fascinating because, as I said, I'd spoken to a couple of the nuns, and one of them, Sister Margaret Mary, she's passed away now. But when I was able to visit the convent and we sort of sat and talked and we had like lunch together and all those things, this woman had a presence and she had a smile, and her smile was the most wonderful, warm, I see you, I'm smiling at you smile. There was, you know, and in the book I talk about her smile. It's the smile that changes the world. You know, we think that power changes the world. We think that wars change the world. That smile changes the world, just on a smaller scale, but further. And what I saw in her was this smile that she had learned from the sisters before her, who were the people who knew Eileen. She was smiling Eileen's smile. And she smiled that smile at me, which is not a personal endorsement, because she smiled that smile at probably 100,000 people in her lifetime. But it's like, you know, we're in a transformation time in terms of religious now. You know, the sisters are no longer so numerous. It's not an ongoing vocation. There's an invitation. There is a baton in the very best of the religious tradition is compassion and non-judgment and caring for everyone, irrespective of race, color, creed. And that smile of compassion and love and acceptance is a baton that's been passed down through generations. And now it's people like you and me, Matt, that take that up, because there aren't people in protected convent environments able to cultivate that so much as there were.
Yeah. I mean, we have to care like that. It's on us to care about one another. And listening is so much of that. Just hearing other people's stories. So I agree with you, and I cut you off, but go on. What you were saying.
So it's a baton, and Eileen is contagious. Yeah. And, you know, in my lighter moments, I would say she's contagious like measles, but nicer.
But nicer and less painful. Yeah, no, I would say, you know, what's beautiful about this conversation to me is I want to read the book, but not because of Eileen, because of you and your story and how this came to you. And you're able to put this out there, because I am fairly certain that reading this book, we can see you, parts of your soul, parts of who you are in those words, whether or not it's even remotely about you, you're there. And I think that's what's really beautiful about you bringing her story to the masses, is you're coming along with it. You know,
Yeah,
you're part of it.
you are so perceptive, because I didn't realize that was what was happening until after I'd written the book. And like Eileen's timeline, it's a dual timeline story, but in Eileen's timeline, there's a fictional best friend who talks Eileen's story. And she had some stuff go on in her own life that she'd kept hidden to protect her family. And there's a line in there where Kathleen says, Eileen, how could I have ever imagined I could tell your story without telling my own? And when I came to that moment of realizing the whole thing from the books out here to the books here, I heard Kathleen saying that line in my head, and I had not known. Like, I had written that line years before. Yeah. So yes, there's a mystery to life.
Listen, there's a power to storytelling, and it's a power that it get from the person telling the story, the person putting together the story, person witnessing it or hearing it from someone else or reading it from someone else. It's like that line earlier that I said, like, there's so much more that we have in common that separates us. This is also like a cliche, the power of storytelling. But like, when we talk in the specifics, it's right here. Your story is that power of storytelling. Like your story and the story of Eileen, it kind of gives me some goosebumps over here, because I think it's really impactful. And I'm wondering what 2026, Kate, in this tapestry that you've woven now of who you are, this mosaic that you have, what would you say to the little Kate who was cutting off the hair of her dolls about this journey of finding how you can help other people was gonna happen? Or is there anything you would want to say?
There's a part of me that kind of is thinking, honey, put those scissors down.
It all brought you here.
Exactly. And you know, Matt, you are so perceptive in what you bring up, because there is a plait of hair in Eileen's museum that was her hair from when she was 5 years old, and her mother had kept it. And there's not the story of why that plait was cut, but I'd seen the plait and, you know, thought, oh my gosh, it's her hair, you know, this is incredible. And then on a subsequent visit to the museum, I looked at that plait, and I knew that 5 years old was when Eileen was reported to have started having trouble with her back. She had an X-ray at that point. This was 1897. She had an X-ray. X-rays had only been used publicly at the end of the year before in the world, you know, and so she's one of the first people in Australia to ever have an X-ray. She also was one of the first saints to have a phone, you know, but so she was up there with technology. But I just got this connection. I bet that hair was cut off when Eileen had to have her first back surgery, because they used to do lots of operations to drain the pus from the abscesses. And I'm looking at that hair and thinking, oh, you poor sweetheart. Yeah. So the cut off hair when I was, and I said it would have happened when I was 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The connections really are shattering when you look at them.
Story, you know, and you think, like, that's a silly moment if you pull it out just in itself, right? But as part of your bigger story, it makes so much sense. You were caring, you were creating the ability for you to care for these dolls, if you will, at 5 years old, without maybe not even knowing what you were doing, just kind of going along. And here we are. You have all these connections. Your story and all of its bumps and beautiful parts and hard parts have brought you to this tapestry, this mosaic that you have now. And here you are sharing someone else's story, which is also your story. And I think is really beautiful. Do you feel that validation is not the right word, but do you feel like proud of what you've done?
I have always had a bit of a problem with the word proud. Do I feel blessed, called, invited, honored, staggered, amazed? All of those.
Okay. We'll skip proud.
Yeah, skip proud. And do I feel like somehow I was invited to be used by a power I don't understand? For sure. Absolutely.
Love it. I thank you for taking this winding road that we took today, not because of you, because of me. I think of this 8-year-old version of myself who lost his mom, and no one around me knew what to do. So I assumed I had to be an adult like everyone else and show everyone I was okay. And along that road was the perfectionism came in, which stunted me from asking questions that were not fully baked, that were maybe I would get a no. Maybe I would be like totally wrong. And I was so afraid of that. So I say thank you to you for allowing me to ask these questions, whatever they may be, because I think there's so much more connection we can have by just saying the things and learning about each other and learning where we don't understand everything, and stop making assumptions about each other. Just as you said, this world needs more. And maybe we're doing it. So thank you for just coming on this journey with me.
Thank you very much. And thank you for it being the journey it is, because you've brought things to my awareness as well.
I love that. So if people are interested in you, I know you don't want them to be too interested in you, but if they're interested in you, they want to check out Eileen's book and your book, what's the best way to find you, get in your space, connect with you? Maybe something in your story connected with them and they want to reach out to you and tell you how it connected. What's the best way to find you?
The easiest thing to say right now would be I have a website. It's kateclinch.com. So that's really easy. But if you look for me, I have a Facebook author page. I have a Substack. So there's the opportunity to leave comments on any blog posts on those things. If you do want to talk to me about a subject, that would be fine.
Yeah, I just encourage people that are listening. There are so many people that are going through something and they feel very alone in that circumstance. And sometimes someone else's story might not be the main part of their story, but they might have just said something on the periphery, of their story, and it resonates with someone. So I always encourage these people that are listening that feel that way to reach out, because I know what it feels like when you tell someone else your story for the first time. There's a weight that is gone when you do that, because everything is out there now. It's not all bumping around up in your head. So I really encourage you to check out Kate's website and her Substack and all the pieces. Buy the book, read the book, tell her how much you like the book, leave a review, all the things that are important in the world so other people can find this story. I don't think Kate wants all the celebrations, but it's probably nice to see every once in a while.
Yeah, and the book in America is quite widely available, Barnes
Great.
& Noble and the online places, and lots of bookstores.
Links on your website to get there?
There actually are some links through my
Perfect.
publisher to American sources.
Great.
Yeah.
So we'll put all that information in the show notes for easy connection to you so that they can connect, and I highly encourage everyone to do so. And again, I say thank you for being a part of this.
Thank you, Matt.
And thank you to everyone for listening and being along this journey for the last, we're in year 5 now. So I'm super honored that people are coming along for the ride, and new people and people that have been here since episode 1. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll be back in a couple days with a brand new episode of the Life Shift Podcast. Thanks again, Kate.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Life Shift Podcast. If you want to learn more, go to www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. There you can check out all the different episodes. You can check out the blog, some of the reviews for the podcast, and the Life Shift Journal. Links are there so you can purchase your own copy, whether in digital or print format. Thanks again.
I see you.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney+. It's the film critics are calling the best Avatar yet.
Yeah! Go, 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 go!
A true epic and completely jaw-dropping.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
Return to Pandora on Disney+.
It will be an adventure for the whole family.
And watch the Oscar-winning phenomenon at home.
This is sick!
Avatar: Fire and Ash, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.